Notes of Truth with Julie Carrick. Here on Morning Joy, where truth matters.
Welcome back to Morning Joy, where truth matters. I'm your host, Keith Downey, and yes, filling in for Julie Carrick is the head of school, a founding faculty member of Cathedral High School, the founding director of sacred music, has a doctorate in liturgical studies with a concentration in church music at the Faculty of Catholic Theology at the University of Vienna. Dr. Alexis Kutarna, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on this morning.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for joining us. Now, I'm not sure if it was just me growing up in kind of like the 90s, early 2000s, but my exposure to chant, there's a couple things. One was the, those CD stations that you'd find at like Target where you'd push the button and it would be like a mixture between chant and some soft jazz. And then the Halo video game. Like those are my two exposures to Gregorian, well, I don't want to call it Gregorian chant, but chanting. So, Doctor, what would you say, all of that, what is the significance of Gregorian chant in our liturgy?
Gregorian chant has this incredibly beautiful significance because it's tied with the word, with the capital W word, right? It exists solely to express the word in the liturgy. And that's its beauty. That's why it's unique in a certain sense in the Roman liturgy, in all forms of the Roman liturgy, because it is principally a scriptural text that has, as they say, flowered into a musical work.
Wow, flowered into a musical work. So it seems like there was a point in time where it was something that was common, right, in the history of our church, and then it kind of went away. What happened?
Sure, there's a couple of periods in our history where that went away. You have to remember that this is an oral tradition, right? And so way before music was written down, it was passed on orally. And that's why we really don't have any written sources until about the 9th or 10th centuries that start to appear. Because, I would sing it to you. I wouldn't be in the same monastery as you, but and you would hear it over years and years and years before you became a cantor. And it was simply handed on in that way. As music started to be written down, really actually all of the origins of Western musical notation come from Gregorian chant. As it started to be written down, that's at a period of time when, there was kind of an explosion of like, wow, we could sing two notes at the same time. And so composers start to leave the area of Gregorian chant and be more creative with more and more parts at the same time. And so I think you do see a decline in a certain sense of Gregorian chant when you have a rise of what we call polyphony, or many parts singing at the same time. We also see a period of decline of Gregorian chant after the Reformation. There's a rise of vernacular hymnody. And so that's, certainly natural. It's too bad that the printing press didn't actually really help Gregorian chant. But the beautiful thing is in what we call the liturgical movement that starts in the late 19th century, there was a real movement to recapture the early books and publish them and make them available to everyone. And so then we started to see a rise in the 20th century again of the use of Gregorian chant.
Wow, that's incredible. But you're listening to Morning Joy, where truth matters. I'm your host, Keith Downey, and we're talking to Dr. Alexis Kutarna. There we go.
Yep.
I need more coffee this morning, folks. But yes, so we're talking about Gregorian chant. You kind of touch a little bit. Why did Gregorian chant, why do you think it declined after the Second Vatican Council?
I think a couple of different things. One, a lot of the music that we sing in the liturgy is in the vernacular, right? So if, you go to Mass in English, and as we had permission for a liturgy in the English language, there wasn't at that time any kind of resource available for chant in English. And this is true in many different languages, even though, there's some German chant. There's even, I have a book about the Roman Rite in the Algonquin and Iroquois missions. And so there was some of the missionaries tried to adapt Gregorian chant into the Huron language, for instance. But, it really wasn't available in English. And so it took composers like Father Columba Kelly, who was a Benedictine monk. He was my chant master. And he passed away a few years ago. He was really the father of English chant in the United States. And so he was studying his doctorate in Rome in 1963. So he was there during the Second Vatican Council, he came back and his abbot said, well, why don't we try this vernacular thing that they're talking about? And so he set about writing a whole bunch of chants in English. So I think it took a while for those resources to be available in English, and now they're becoming available in Spanish as well. And so we could even see an adaptation of chant into the vernacular these days.
Wow, that's amazing. So there's a lot of history involved in the Gregorian chant, and we're seeing it somewhat come back into the fold in a lot of parishes. If there's someone out there that might be musically inclined and they're listening to the show, how do they go about maybe learning how to chant?
Well, there are a good number of workshops and resources available. Thankfully, we do have the internet today, and that can be used for good, right? It can be neutral in a certain sense. It can be used for good. And in this case, there are, if you are at home and you just want to start doing it today, there are YouTube channels dedicated to teaching you Gregorian chant. But I think it's best handed on in person. So I would recommend things like right now we're in the middle of our chant workshop at St. Mary's Seminary, sponsored by the St. Basil School of Gregorian Chant here in Houston. And then there are workshops around the country. So in 2 weeks in Cincinnati, there is a Sacred Music Institute. So if you have any listeners in that area, if they're in the Midwest and they're interested in going, we have an in-person workshop for that. So there are a number of different workshops around the country, but I would really recommend just starting to listen because we handed it on that way. And it's supposed to be about the word received, right? Not just about reading it or watching a video about it, but just listening to Gregorian chant.
Listening. That kind of goes back into kind of the top we were just talking about with Debbie Georgiani and Adam Bly, like effective communication. This in itself, Gregorian chant, is almost effective communication. Like you said, that's the word that's being chanted there. So let's say there's people out there that are listening and they really see the true beauty of Gregorian chanting, but maybe their particular parish hasn't really taken a hold of it. What kind of advice would you give them on trying to get that into their parish?
Sure. I think it depends a lot on the parish situation. There are some parishes who might be kind of more ready for the experience of that. So I think often it takes speaking with your music director, your choir director, and saying, I really love the beauty of this. There's nothing to be gained from being, angry about these things or grouchy about it, right? But just to say there's something really beautiful here. Could we take a look at it? I think that the modern Roman liturgy actually allows for us to kind of have a both and, very Catholic, right?
Yeah.
That we can have both, a communion antiphon and then a hymn that beautifully expresses the Eucharistic mystery. And so I think there's room for that, going and saying, this is something really beautiful. Could we take a look at that? I think that pastors who are interested in that, again, it's a question about helping to show people that this is something that is contemplative, that it's especially suited to the sacred liturgy, says the Second Vatican Council, to the Roman liturgy. And just that gradual introduction to it, I think, is really, can be a really beautiful gift for a parish.
Yeah, I back when I was kind of in my 20s, that's kind of where I essentially heard Gregorian chanting at one of the parishes that I went to in Phoenix, St. Simon and Jude Cathedral, actually, to be exact. And the newer pastor there, he started bringing back some of this chant, this Gregorian chant, and I was blown away by it. It's not something, like I said, the only times I've heard of chanting was, of course, those 90s CD stations and video games. So it was really nice to hear that, and it just is like, I want to hear more of this. I want to hear more. So it's nice. It's just, you kind of just step in and be like, hey, I'd love to, listen, hear some of this in the Mass. It doesn't have to be a complete change in all the music. It can be an addition to the liturgy. So that's incredible. You wrote a book.
Yes.
Solemnities, Celebrating a Tapestry of Divine Beauty. What inspired you to write that?
Oh, so I was a co-author on this book with two of my professors from the Liturgical Institute at Mundelein Seminary. And we were approached by Ascension Press. It was kind of a collaborative project between the Liturgical Institute and Ascension, so that we could provide a resource for families, for individuals, for really understanding the solemnities of the liturgical year. These are great high feast days, and we, I think, experience some of them if we only go to Mass on Sunday, but there are 17. So we wrote basically 17 essays in a certain sense, and we wanted it to be a meditation. So the book is a lovely hardbound book so that it could be heirloom quality. Something, kind of like a coffee table book that you actually use.
Wow.
And it's full of beautiful artwork. It's full of a meditation on the liturgical texts, but then also an introduction to the ways in which that solemnity is celebrated around the world. So from talking about a St. Joseph's table for March 19th for the Solemnity of St. Joseph to, the fires for St. John the Baptist. And I give a few suggestions in there of how you might celebrate that in the home. And so, there's a really great movement, I think, today in what we call liturgical living. And there are several people really active in that movement. And so we wanted to provide kind of an assistance to that so that whether you were single, an empty nester, a family with young children, that there are novenas that you can pray, there are foods that you can make, and there are many different ways of living out the solemnities of the year.
Wow. So it's like kind of building that domestic church. It sounds like with this.
Absolutely.
What the book is. Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, that's a thing that I find myself as a father trying to really instill a lot of aspects of our faith, like solemnities, making sure we are observing them, and that my children know that this isn't just a normal day, and try to make it to Mass. So that's great that you have a book that's kind of dedicated to that.
Absolutely, yes.
So I guess one last thing, and this is more of like a personal question, but I'm sure there's people out there. If we're not great at singing, how difficult would it be from someone who maybe has never really sung too well before and they want to get into Gregorian chanting?
I think it's just a matter of doing it, right? This is a muscle that you need to exercise. So if you want to learn how to play basketball, you have to pick up a ball and start, right? And so I think that's the thing for Gregorian chant. Just start listening to it, start singing it, lend your voice to the sacred liturgy.
Awesome. Any lasting words you'd like to give our listeners out there before they start their day?
I hope that everyone can have the experience of contemplating the word. And so I encourage you to listen to Gregorian chant and to really enter into the contemplation of the sacred word.
Love it. Well, Dr. Alexis Kutarna, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. We can catch more of you at chantschool.org.
Yes.
Awesome. Lovely. And that's it for our first half of Morning Joy. This one flew by, certainly. Now, we understand that you might be listening to the Holy Mass coming up next. If that's the case, please pray for us. We'll continue to pray for you. But we got so much more coming up on our second hour. We're talking to the president of the University of St. Thomas, Dr. Ludwig. You're not going to want to miss that one. And then, of course, we have an after-show clubhouse literally right after the show where you can join in the conversation. You just need to go search Morning Joy Radio on any of the social medias. We recommend YouTube. Great community there. We'll see you there. But this is us parting ways. God bless. Make it a joyful day. Other than that, we'll see you right after this break.
This has been Morning Joy, where truth matters, hosted by Keith Downey. Take some joy with you today. Visit grnonline.com/joy to listen again, share a segment, or answer the question of the day. That's grnonline.com/joy.